Well, hello, everyone, and welcome once again to another episode of the 360 Experience podcast. I am your host, Tim Braheem, and I'm also your guest today. And the subject matter of today's podcast episode is something that I call the work. And what I mean by the work is what I consider to be the most important work that any of us could ever do as human beings, both in our personal lives and in our business lives, which is do the work that takes place between the ears, the work around our thoughts, our emotions, and our energy. Now, those that are members of my coaching program, Leadership 360, know the importance of the work. It's the backbone of the coaching curriculum that we do, because the work, those thoughts that we generate and the feelings and emotions that we have everything to do with our success in business and in our lives. So today I'm going to be solo, and I'm going to be talking to you about the importance of doing your own personal work on yourself. And for many of you, this will be of great resonance. If it's not something that you've been exposed to before in your life, I invite you to sit back with an open mind and be prepared to really consider some of the concepts that I'm talking about today and how they may be influencing and impacting your ultimate success in your business and in your life. As always, this episode is sponsored by the Loan Atlas. If you haven't checked out the Loan Atlas yet, you really need to. It is an incredible educational virtual coaching program that is now going to be backed by artificial intelligence. We're really proud of what we're creating and how we're supporting loan originators all over the country in growing in their business and in their life. So check out the Loan Atlas. The link will be in the show notes. And in particular, take note of the fact that we're releasing our AI-driven business planning tool to help you get out of the blocks and have a successful 2026. So without further ado, my friends, my conversation with you about the work in the 360 Experience podcast. Okay, so the work, and I'm going to glance down at notes from time to time, full disclosure here. The work is an inner transformational practice of becoming aware of our thoughts, our emotions, and ultimately our energy and how they influence and impact our experience in our life. Now, the reality of it, folks, whether you realize this or not, is you have somewhere between 60 and 90,000 thoughts every single day. And it is estimated that somewhere between 80 and 90% of those thoughts you had yesterday and the day before and the day before that. I'm going to be referencing some wonderful teachers as I have this conversation with you over the next period of time. People such as Dr. Joe Dispenza, who I'm a big fan of and a student of. Eckhart Tolle, who many of you probably know of from his great books, The Power of Now and A New Earth. And certainly Deepak Chopra, who's another great thought leader in this space. So what is statistically proven is that our thoughts create emotions. So let's just kind of use an example here. Let's hypothetically say that you have the thought of, I'm concerned about where my loan production is going to come from next month. That thought is going to create an emotion, and that emotion might be anxiety and or fear. That emotion generates an energetic frequency within your body, and we are all vibrational beings. We all vibrate at certain frequencies throughout the day depending upon our thoughts and our subsequent emotions. We emit, and it can be measured with an energetic field roughly 2 to 3 feet around all parts of your body. We emit energy that other people pick up on. So we're walking through our day, we're experiencing thoughts. Some are great thoughts, some are not so great thoughts. We then have subsequent emotions associated with those thoughts, and then we emit energy, and we're doing that all day long, and other people are picking up on it. So when you think about it logically for a minute, it would state that, the reality is that our thoughts are very important. If we have 60 to 90,000 of them a day, 80 to 90% of them are on a repetitive thought loop. What is it that we're carrying around every day, and what is it that we are expressing and omitting as we go through our day? And ultimately, what you think and what you feel equates to your personality. And I want to repeat that again. What you think and what you feel equates to your personality. So thoughts and emotions directly impact relationships in our life, our emotional state, and ultimately our business success. During the calendar years of 2020 and 2021 and 22, when things were really going well, you were having really positive thoughts throughout your day. You were locking in loans, your phone was ringing off the hook, you were looking at what your paycheck was going to be at the end of the month, and you felt really good about yourself. And you had bounce in your step. You were emitting certain energetic frequencies based upon your thoughts and your emotional state that were very magnetic. People were picking up on it. You were in a good mood. You were ready to go. You were in a rhythm, etc. And then rates really started to take a turn. And different thoughts crept in, didn't they? Thoughts of worry, thoughts of fear. And those thoughts generated emotions and subsequently energetic vibrations that when you engaged with potential realtor partners and or prospective clients impacted the way that you showed up. So I just want you to think about it for just a moment. I want you to think of someone in your life who is by and large positive most of the time. They're in a good mood. They look at things through that lens on a consistent basis. They're very curious. They're looking to learn and grow. What's your experience when you're around someone who has positive thoughts, positive vibe and emotions, and subsequently an energetic frequency that is vibrating at a very high level? Aren't these the people that you can't get enough of, that you want to spend more time with? You're not really quite sure what it is at the end of the day that makes your engagement with them so special, but I'll tell you what it is. You are picking up on their vibrational frequency and it feels really good. You're feeding off of their vibration. As a public speaker, I experience this all the time. I could go into a room of several hundred people, and if they're in a fear-based state of mind or they have lots of things in their mind and they're on their phone while I'm presenting, etc., I can feel the low vibration in the room and it drains me. It really brings me down. Or subsequently, when I practice my presentations in front of a mirror, when I'm done, I feel like I need a nap. I'm exhausted because there's no exchange of energy. I'm emitting energy, but I'm not getting anything back. Subsequently, when I'm in a room where the audience is very fixated on me, I'm picking up on their energy and it's lifting me up. Now, I want you to go back to the example. Think of somebody in your life who is downtrodden most of the time. Their glass is half empty. They're a victim. They're always blaming others. Everything is woe is me. What does it feel like when you're around that person? It feels like they're a wet blanket. I mean, you want to get away from them as soon as you possibly can, right? Well, the reason you want to get away from them as soon as you possibly can is because you're picking up on their low vibrational frequency of energy that is being generated by those thoughts and subsequent emotions. Now, let's think about this for a minute. If we attract into our lives relationships based upon what we're vibrating at, if our magnet is ultimately to vibrate at a high frequency because it causes people to be drawn to us, realtors, borrowers, other prospective referral sources, wouldn't it make sense that we do a little bit of work on ourselves and really examine, maybe in some of your cases for the first time in your life, what are those repetitive thoughts, those 60 to 90,000 a day that are on a perpetual thought loop, and how are they affecting the way I show up in the world? That's what I'm talking about when I talk about doing the work. So much of this is covered in my Leadership 360 coaching program. We take 12 clients annually and we take them on a one-year journey. It's a business development specific to the mortgage industry coaching program, but it's also an inner landscape journey where we're working with them on their mindset, the energy that they bring to the room, and the subsequent attractions that they are drawing into their life. Leadership 360 Signature, we start interviewing every January. If that's something that sounds of interest to you, feel free to, in the show notes below, click on the link and you can apply, and there's an interview process where we'll get to know you. Okay, so Dr. Joe Dispenza has said time and time again, and if you don't know who he is, you should check him out. I'm a huge fan of his. Where you put your attention is where you put your energy. That's a very important quote. Where you put your attention is where you put your energy. So is your attention on the negative things in your life, or is your attention on gratitude and the positive things in your life? So if we're walking around with a belief system in our head of, I'm not good enough, I'm not really sure that I have the confidence in myself, like why would somebody want to work with me? That's going to trigger a feeling of anxiety because of that insecure feeling, which results in behavioral patterns such as avoidance or overcompensation. So let's slow this down for a minute. And that's the key word. How often do you slow things down and take a little break from the chaos of your life and sit with your thoughts and ask yourself the questions such as, how do I feel about me? What are my worries and fears? How rational are those worries and fears? How much am I in this perpetual thought loop of concern and anxiety? And what is that doing not only to my physical and emotional health, but what is that doing to my ability to cultivate abundance in my life, create relationships in my life? Now, none of us or very few of us are ever really taught when we're young about the importance of stepping out of our life, slowing things down, taking a break to examine our thoughts. No, most of us just go through life at a rapid pace because we're in achievement mode and we're flying right by day, not even aware of what those thoughts are that we are running in the background. Now, emotional intelligence is what I'm talking about here, the ability to regulate one's emotions. And I don't claim to be perfect at this by any stretch of the imagination. Every bit of this presentation, this podcast episode is autobiographical. I am constantly required personally as a human being, if I want to learn and grow and get better at this thing called life and better at this thing called business success, I'm constantly challenged to slow things down and to do a little bit of journaling or to meditate. We're going to get into some of the tools in a few minutes, so stay tuned on that. But there are certain techniques that can help you with it. So the question that I want to pose to you is, what are the repetitive thought patterns that are running through your consciousness all day long? Have you ever had that circumstance before where you're like listening to someone talking to you, but the whole time you're thinking? That's what I'm talking about, the repetitive thought patterns. Or you're talking. How about this one? There's a circumstance where you're talking with someone, and while you're talking with them, you're simultaneously having a different conversation in your head. That's the repetitive thought patterns that I'm talking about that ultimately affect our business and life success. So Eckhart Tolle said, in a quote, "Awareness is the greatest agent for change." So having an awareness of what we're thinking about and how it's affecting us is critically important. So our thoughts are developed very early on in our life, and they subsequently result in us generating behavioral patterns that form what we call our personality. So if you go back to when you were very young, I want you to think about this for a moment. And if it's difficult for you to envision yourself and what I'm about to explain, I want you to envision your child if you have one. You came into this world as an infant, and you were completely and utterly codependent upon your parents. So you come into this world, you're a few days old. All you know is that every need that you had was taken care of. Remember, you went through this. Every one of us did. We were fed, we were held, we were rocked to sleep, we were comforted when we were in a painful state, maybe cutting teeth or having colic or something like that. We were held close, right? We were loved. And then through socialization, when you got a little bit older, bear with me, okay? I'm going somewhere with this. It will equate to business. Don't think that I'm running astray or down a rabbit hole. Then somewhere through the course of socialization, your parents decided, I need to teach him or her boundaries. I need to teach him or her rules. I need to teach him or her how to show up in the world. Maybe now you're 1 year old, right? And maybe you're acting out a little bit. Maybe you get spanked or you get yelled at or you get ignored. All of those things send a message to you as a young infant new to the world that your love or that adoration could be taken away if you don't act a certain way. And it happens over and over. It happens with our grandparents and our school teachers and our siblings. And before you know it, you're in adolescence and maybe you're 5 or 6 years old and you've been taught through socialization that there are certain fundamental aspects of you that are not acceptable. Remember, you came into the world and everything was acceptable in those first few days. Now, all of a sudden, you're taught that there are certain behaviors that you are exhibiting that are not okay and that there's a penalty or a consequence. And I'm not saying that's wrong because, yes, parents need to socialize their kids, but I want you to look at it through the lens of you when you were an infant. So here's the fact. We all have one great desire, every one of us listening to this show. We all want to be liked, loved, accepted, and seen. That is the crux of human existence. That's what we're all striving for. That's why we work hard in our business, because we want to feel good about ourselves. We want somebody to tell us we did good. When we see that large check that comes in from several loans that we funded that month, we feel good about ourselves. Okay, we're all striving for that. But back to the adolescent stage. Now all of a sudden, you being you isn't good enough sometimes. And that love and that like, that seen, that acceptance is pulled away. So what do? You do what we all do. You develop behavioral strategies. These behavioral strategies, which become our personality, are how we compensate for the things that we have learned are deficient in us. They're not really deficient in us, but that's what we're taught. So that could look like becoming a perfectionist. It could look like being submissive. It could look like developing a sense of humor to kind of cool the icy air that might be going on in your family dynamic among your parents. We make them laugh so we can get attention. None of these strategies are wrong. There's nothing about this that's wrong. That's not what I'm saying. I just want to bring awareness to that fact that this is what we all do and go through. And this becomes our personality that we walk through the world with. Okay, for me, autobiographically, I'm a perfectionist. And it is a great gift at times, especially in business, especially when I want to do something special for someone in my personal life. I do it with perfection. I follow through. I'm highly accountable. Nobody has to worry about whether or not I'm going to do what I say I'm going to do. But there's a shadow side to it. It can rob me of presence. It could have me working too much. It could have me striving too hard. It could have me being hard on myself. Some of you, if that doesn't fit for you, that shoe doesn't fit, some of you are demure. You don't speak up. You learned at a very young age that a child's place is not to be seen, not to be vocal, to be quiet, and you were rewarded for that. You got what you wanted. Again, liked, loved, seen, accepted. It's important that we examine these things because they have an impact ultimately on who we become as human beings and as adults. So you can't change what you're not aware of. The work is a brave concept. It requires us to self-reflect once again, slow it down once again, and ask ourselves some very important questions about ourselves. Is this working for me? Or is this causing me consistent pain and upheaval and a lack of success in my life because maybe some of the things that I developed at an early age are getting in the way? And it's driven once again by beliefs. What are the beliefs that I have about me, who I am in the world, and how I need to show up to be successful? So let's just take an example. I know a lot of people who are very successful and for reasons that go back to their childhood are afraid of asking for what they need. They're afraid of asking for help. They feel as if they're putting somebody out if they ask for help. Now, again, this probably goes back to their childhood where maybe they, at a young age, asked for something that they needed and they were told that they were selfish or something like that. So they play small. They hide. They don't ask for help. Now, think about how this could be affecting that person as they're looking to grow in their business. If you're that kind of person, the question that I would have for you is, why are you holding back on asking for what you need? Why are you holding back on asking for help? Maybe there's somebody within your work environment who has wisdom that you don't have, that you could be reaching out to and asking for help. But we go through life, once again, on a very repetitive rinse, wash, repeat. And before you know it, in later days of our life, we're looking back on our life and we have regrets because maybe certain things didn't evolve in the way that we wanted them to, come to fruition in the way that we wanted them to, in our interpersonal relationships with our spouse, with our children, with our friends, or in our business success. So, signs to look for here. If you're stuck in repeated relationships, whether it be in personal life or in business, when I was a loan originator in my early years, I started to notice a pattern that I was consistently engaged in relationships with realtor partners where I was playing the subservient role. And I was doing things that I wasn't proud of to try to earn their business. I was whining and dining them. I was pursuing hard. I was acting very needy. So where did that come from? That came from a lack of security within myself that I had something truly valuable to offer. Okay, so if I slow that down and I ask myself the question, all right, what's the belief here? Well, the belief is that I'm not good enough and I need to go above and beyond the call of duty and really impress to an excessive degree to where I'm playing in a subservient role to this person and then I'm angry about it. Anybody ever have that happen? I mean, I used to have situations that I went through a period of time for about 3 years where I didn't work with any realtors because I was so angry with them after the first 4 years of being in the business. I was like, all realtors suck. But that's not true. They don't all suck. It's just the ones that I was attracting into my life sucked because I was engaging in the relationship in a way to where my insecurities were ruling the day. So I had to slow it down and take a look at that belief. What am I holding as a belief? And the belief I was holding was that I don't have anything really that valuable to offer. Well, is that really true? Do I care? Yeah, I care. Do I take my job seriously? Yes, I do. Am I devoted to my learning and growth as a mortgage professional to try to be better at what I do? Yes, I do. Do I make them look good by providing great customer service to the borrowers that they're kind enough to refer to me? Absolutely, I do. See, those are reframed beliefs and those are facts. But I was being run by old beliefs from my childhood. And until I slowed it down and cultivated some awareness around what stories I was telling myself and what behaviors it was driving, what personality traits I was exhibiting, I was stuck in a repetitive loop of attracting into my life the same kind of relationships. And I did it in my dating life too, back in the early days. If you're overreacting, another sign, if you're overreacting emotionally to small triggers, okay? So if you find yourself being somebody that overreacts and gets triggered and like looks back on it and says, gosh, why did I get so fired up there? I mean, that really wasn't that big of a deal. That's a clue. That's a sign to slow it down and ask yourself the question, when I was in that moment, what was it about that interaction with that person that triggered me so violently? And the probability of it is it was something very familiar to you from your childhood and your past. And looking at that and doing the work around healing that will change the behavior going forward. What about another sign? Avoidance behaviors or procrastination. Chasing shiny objects. I'm sure that there are some of you listening that can relate to that one. Not really being able to stay focused and present with an activity for any extended period of time and then going off to the next activity. Or people pleasing. How many of you just people please too much and don't have proper boundaries in your life? And where does that come from? There are a lot of studies around people pleasers. People pleasers often came from a difficult childhood, perhaps where they had a volatile parent or an alcoholic parent. So they got their love, they got noticed by being the person that was like settled everything down and was a good boy or a good girl and got good grades and performed, right, to get that attention. Okay, but how is that serving you going forward in your life? Are there times where you're just people pleasing too much and you're a doormat and you don't have boundaries, like I said, that people adhere to because you don't ask for what you need? What about perfectionism? Okay, again, autobiographical here. So I'm pretty good at what I do. I think I'm a really good coach. I think I'm really good at designing retreats. In fact, I think I'm fantastic at it at this stage. I have a lot of experience with it and I take it very seriously. And the retreats that I do in my Leadership 360 coaching program are phenomenal. And they can cause suffering for me. And the way that they cause suffering is that I care so much about them being A+, that an A or an A- feels like defeat. Do any of you ever feel that way, where your perfectionism is so powerful that you're really never doing enough to where you can't take a step back and just give yourself a pat on the back and acknowledge yourself because you're always having to try to prove yourself? See, this is another sign of where there is work to be done. So It's about, as Eckhart Tolle says, it's about witnessing. This is super key, okay? It's about witnessing the experience without judgment. So if I notice myself being a perfectionist, maybe something's not going completely smooth on one of my retreats. Last year, we had a very unfortunate circumstance at my retreat in Costa Rica where it literally rained every single day, all day long. And there was a hurricane or a tropical storm nearby. And it just was not the experience I had designed in my mind, nor it was the experience that I was accustomed to after 14 years of doing this. And I found myself in those first couple of days being very agitated, very frustrated because things weren't going smoothly. I was holding on to a vision of perfection that I wanted those 12 clients of mine to experience. Like in some way it was my fault that the weather was bad, was how I was holding it. And I knew enough, because I've done enough of this kind of work, to slow everything down and just ask myself the question, like, what's happening right now? And I'm journaling on it a little bit. And again, we'll get to some of the techniques here in a few minutes, but just kind of writing down some of my feelings. And I realized, yeah, you're wanting so bad, Tim, for people to think for people to revere you, for people to think about how great you are at designing these retreats. And now it's been taken away from you. Are you going to surrender to the experience? Because it's not in your control. Or are you going to fight it? And that was a great opportunity for me to do some work around the fact that, hey, I'm going to do the best that I can, and that is enough. So for you that are perfectionists, that's a great exercise, is to look through the lens of like, how can I be happy with an A-? How can I be happy with how I show up? Because that's the other thing. As a perfectionist, for me, it can really affect my ability to be present. Because if I am constantly striving to be an A+, constantly striving to do better, exceed expectations, all of that, where am I? I'm up here. I'm up here in my head. I'm not down here in my heart. And it makes it incredibly difficult for me to be present and connect with people, which is something that is very important to me at this stage of my life. So that's an example there for you. Let's talk about reframing limiting beliefs. So there's a great book that I would encourage you to buy. I have all of my clients read it. It's called The Big Leap, L-E-A-P, by Gay Hendricks. There's also an episode in the 360 Experience with me and Gay where we talk about a lot of these concepts of limiting beliefs. Essentially what a limiting belief is it's a thought pattern that's been ingrained into our consciousness. I want you to think of it as almost like we're driving down a gravel road with a very heavy truck. If I drive down that gravel road several times in that very heavy, F-150, what's going to happen in the gravel? Well, it's going to have a very deep indentation of where the tires went over it over and over, and there's a groove in the gravel now, okay? So the way the brain works is this. When we have thoughts, they generate neural pathways in our brain. Now think about it. If you have 60 to 90,000 thoughts a day, 80 to 90% of them you had yesterday, you've put some pretty deep grooves into your brain, some very deep neural pathways in there that are your belief system. They are the way you think. They are what you buy into. They are the lens with which you view the world. If you were, as a young child like me, this is a little bit vulnerable for me to use this as an example. If you were in trouble a lot as a little kid and got yelled at a lot, which I did, I started to develop a belief that I'm not a good boy. And the question is like, how many times have you had that thought? Whatever the thought is, okay? What's the repetitive thoughts that you've had since you were little? And what are the neural pathways that are in your brain that are your belief system and the lens with which you're seeing the world? So I spent and continue to spend sometimes, if I don't catch myself, a lot of my life trying to prove I'm not a bad boy. That's kind of what I'm talking about right there, is these repetitive thought patterns. So it requires you to slow down once again and see it. I've had some very significant events happen to me in my life, in relationships in particular. One in particular for 3.5 years that was a very, very painful relationship with a lady who constantly reminded me that I wasn't good enough. I wasn't present enough. I wasn't generous enough. I wasn't loving enough. And I constantly spent my time trying to prove her wrong. Well, where is that going to take you, right? I mean, think about that for a minute. Same thing in your business life. I mean, what are the repetitive thoughts that you've had since you were very young that have grooved these neural pathways in your brain that have subsequently resulted in you showing up a certain way in your business that is getting in the way of your business success? If you were taught to be demure, if you were taught to be the quiet one in the room as a child, it'd probably be pretty tough for you to ask for business when you're meeting with a CPA or when you're meeting with a financial advisor or a realtor, because it's butting right up against a belief that you have that you're doing something wrong by asking for what you need, for asking for help. That's the kind of stuff that I'm talking about there. So some examples. If you believe I'm not good at sales, how would we reframe that? How about I'm learning how to communicate authentically and with connection? That's a total different viewpoint. Some of us may say, selling to somebody, this is autobiographical for me too, is inconveniencing them. Okay. I've held that belief before, that if I'm sharing the value proposition that I have, that I'm somehow off-putting or somehow imposing upon somebody against their will. That's going to make it really tough when you think about it to sell in an effective way to somebody. If you're holding back because you feel in your belief system from way back when that you're in some way being rude or inconveniencing or putting somebody off. A good reframe to that would be, I have a lot to offer and I've spent a lot of time educating myself. And it's my obligation to make sure that the people that I talk to know how I can help them. Totally different belief, right? That's what I'm talking about reframing beliefs. How about no one ever supports me? Anybody have that belief? I never get help from anyone. How about I'm learning to ask clearly for what I need and allow people to allow people to give support to me. Okay, so let me say that again. I'm learning to ask clearly for what I need and allow people to give support to me. Okay, so this is a big one. I want you to think about this for a minute, because I know that many people listening to this episode have this running, where they think that by asking for help, they're somehow inconveniencing someone, or it's a sign of weakness to ask for help. I want you to think of a time where you selflessly gave to someone else. Maybe you've done some service work. Maybe you put yourself and your own agenda to the side for a best friend and spent time with them, or for your child when they were down about something. What did it feel like to selflessly give to somebody else? It feels pretty damn good, doesn't it? I mean, you probably walked away feeling like, wow, like my heart is open and I feel really good about what I just did to help another human being. So if you agree with that, then my question to you is this: those of you that have a hard time asking for help, why would you rob someone of the ability to have that feeling? Why are you making up a story and believing that somehow you're immune from being able to ask for help, and that somehow you're flawed and don't deserve to ask for help, and subsequently not giving that other person the opportunity to help you and feel that same feeling that you had in the example that I just gave? So that's what I'm talking about that reframe. So let's talk about some tools and practices now. So in Dr. Joe Dispenza's work, and if you've not followed him, I encourage you to do so. He's a brilliant teacher. He teaches visualization and mental rehearsal through meditation. Okay, so identifying the limiting beliefs that you may have. Okay, and in the visualization process, adopting a new reframed belief and feeling the emotions and the energy of that new belief. So that might be something like, as an example of me saying, I'm inconveniencing someone by asking for their help. And then reframing that and going through that process in the meditation of understanding and saying to myself over and over, I am gifting somebody the opportunity to help me so we can connect at a deeper way and they can feel the authenticity of who they really are as a loving human being, and really like embodying that new belief over and over. Remember, 60 to 90,000 thoughts a day, 80 to 90% on a repetitive thought loop. If you're going to rewire new neural pathways in your brain and have a new belief system, it's going to take some work. That's why I call it the work. Are you going to continue to go down the same path and phone it in? Or are you going to do this work, which is noble and brave work, to have a new reality in your life? Eckhart Tolle talks about putting space between stimulus and response, and I want to talk about this for a minute. This is actually from a book called Man's Search for Meaning. Viktor Frankl is the author of that book. Viktor Frankl is a psychiatrist who was a Jewish psychiatrist in a Nazi concentration camp during the war. And he obviously survived to write the book. It's a wonderful book that I encourage you to read. But in that book, Viktor Frankl talked about putting space between stimulus and response. So, super easy example to give you. You're driving down the highway and somebody cuts you off. They come flying by and cut in front of you, and you immediately start screaming at them and honking the horn, and maybe your kid's in the back seat of the car seeing you go ballistic and using profanity and all that kind of stuff. That's an example of a stimulating event. You got cut off and an immediate response that you then later regret. Ever had that happen before, or some version of that, to where you're like, God, why did I act that way? So the art form, again, is to slow it down. Put some space between the stimulus event and the response. It is said that Abraham Lincoln, every time he was upset about something at one of his generals or one of his cabinet members, that rather than act out and talk to them right away, he would pause and he would write a letter to them expressing everything it was that he wanted to say out of anger, and he would put it in his desk drawer and let it sit there for at least one full day before he sent it. And it is said that upon his death, there were dozens and dozens of letters in his desk drawer that he never sent. This is black belt work. Putting space, slowing it down, artfully and skillfully not responding. Again, autobiographical for me. This is something that I'm constantly working on. I had an event happen just a week ago to where I got angry with someone and fired back at them really hard on a Zoom call, a dear friend of mine. And afterwards, I felt terrible. And I really had wished that I would have just slowed it down and put some space in between that event and my response to that event. So journaling is very important. Building that into your morning routine or your evening routine, taking 10, 15 minutes to just write about what you experienced today. What beliefs came up for you? What were your responses? How did you show up? And again, meditation. I'll talk a little bit more about meditation. I mean, meditation is so valuable. I mean, people are starting to adopt meditation more and more. I've been meditating for 25 years. I've had, I don't even know, hundreds of people probably say to me, I can't believe that you could sit there for 45 minutes doing nothing. Like my mind is too active and there's no way I could do that. My mind's active too. The whole point of meditation is to be the observer of your thoughts. It's not to get the mind to stop thinking. The word meditate is the definition of the word meditate. Its original origin is to become familiar with. So the point of meditation is to sit with your thoughts. And if over a period of time your thoughts start to slow down and you go into no thought and feel a blissful experience, great. But I don't want you to really look at it that way. I just want you to look at it through the lens of, I'm just going to sit here with my eyes closed. I'm going to shut out all external stimuli, put my phone on forward, get light and all of my senses reduced, my eyes, my hearing, all of that. I'm just going to be the observer of my thoughts. You're going to be surprised as what happens. I mean, I did a 4-day silent retreat one time where we meditated 16 hours a day. All I did was watch that repetitive thought loop, those 60 to 90,000 thoughts, those 80 to 90% that I had the day before. There's great value in that. It's not easy. Yes, it could be frustrating and painful, but boy, can you get really familiar with watching the thinking mind. And remember, okay, that thinking mind is running in the background all the time. It's running right now as you're listening to me. It's running for me right now as I'm talking to you. And it is driving your personality, your emotions, and the energy that you're emitting into the world. So to break old patterns, just to summarize, we need to learn to pause and create space. And it's really hard to do this when we're in a rushed and reactive state of mind. Especially in the industry that we're in, especially with all that's coming at you all the time, appraisal reviews and emails left and right, and realtors wanting to know status and borrowers having questions. When you think about it, when you analyze your day, you're reacting all day. So the question is that what are you doing proactively to carve out the time that is necessary to take respite from all of that? This is where a morning routine can be very effective. For me, I try to really build into my life in general strategic pauses throughout my year where I just go and shut everything down, and I'm quiet, and I spend time in nature, and I journal a lot, and I meditate a lot, and I get really familiar with my thoughts, and I try to rewire as many of them as I can. And I'll be doing this for the rest of my life. But the interesting thing is that when I look back 20 years ago and I ask myself the honest question, are you the same person that you were 20 years ago? The answer is not even close. I definitely like who I am more now than I was 20 years ago. I've improved in so many areas, but it's because of doing this work. So we all know that stress kills. Okay. I was just actually reading an Instagram post, the carousels that you swipe, left on, and there's several pages. And it was a study that was done in the different blue zones in the world. And yes, their diets are important. Yes, their physical activity is important. But the number one thing that causes people to live longer is a lack of consistent stress in their life. The people that live a lifestyle that they don't sweat the small stuff, they're not constantly reacting to triggers and stimulus that are getting them jacked up, and the cortisol running through their body, which is a definitely not a healthy drug that we produce naturally. Those are the people that live longer. So Dispenza talks a lot about the different brain waves, the different frequencies of brain waves. So when you're in high beta, okay, the beta state of brainwave is what we're all in right now, unless you're falling asleep in this podcast, because I'm telling you a story that's making you sleepy. But for most of us that are listening to this show right now, you're in beta. And when you are in a very reactive state, when something triggering happens to you, you're in high beta, which means that your brain in an EKG, the waves in your brain are in a very rapid state and fluctuating very fast. Meditation, slowing things down, will reduce your brainwave frequency to theta, okay? And that's where change happens in our life. So that's why we want to slow things down, slow our brain down. When we slow our brain down, we can create mental acuity and clarity and start to see some of the patterns of things that are happening. And this happens, I see this happen all the time. I mentioned this a couple of times on retreat. When we're on retreat in Costa Rica for those 8 days, the people that show up at the beginning are totally different people, and they leave, because for 8 straight days, we slow them down. We commune in nature. We do our meditative practices before we do our business work. We're in a highly creative state when we're doing our business work, because our brains are not cluttered with all kinds of emotions and activities, and breakthroughs happen, and people get really clear on what they want to create for their life. And it's a very magical experience. So let's take a look at a few common inner blocks as we make our way to the end of this episode. So fear of rejection, that's what is the result. That's the source of call reluctance. So if you have call reluctance in sales, it's very likely because you're worried about being rejected. Now, who wouldn't be worried about being rejected? Again, we all want to be liked, loved, seen, respected, accepted. So if we're all carrying that, and then we have a worry in the back of our mind, a story that we're buying into, that if the person says no, or if they say, I'm already working with a lender in the mortgage space, or I don't have time to meet with you, if we take that personally because we're holding a belief that fundamentally means that we're not good enough, of course you're going to avoid it. That would be an example of a belief that you might want to take a look at reframing. How about something healthier, like I have a lot to offer, and I'm going to put myself out there in the world, and the people that aren't ready to experience the value that I have to offer won't want to meet with me, but it has nothing to do with me. It has to do with them not seeing my value yet. A totally different belief that you may want to work on reframing. Fear of failure. This is one that definitely resonates for me. That's what results in overworking and perfectionism. The fear of, if I don't impress, I may fall out of favor. I may not be liked. That's as close to the fear of death as most of us have, as not being liked, not being seen. Needing for external validation. If you fall into that category, that's what results in people pleasing and ultimately burnout. These are the originators that I see that spend excessive amounts of time with clients and realtors and let them walk all over them, calling them at 9 o'clock at night. They're afraid that if they don't take that call, that they won't be validated, they won't be liked, and they're consistently allowing their boundaries to be dropped. So the reality of it is this, is that we need to fix the inner game, the inner landscape, and it will correct the outer game. So many people that I know frustratingly try to change the outer experience. They try to force themselves to not have call reluctance. They try to force themselves to not chase shiny objects. They try to force themselves, and it's not working. And that's because they haven't looked inward. Outer experiences are a reflection of inner reality. I'm going to repeat that. Outer experiences, whatever you're experiencing out there, is a reflection of what's going on in here. Outer experiences are a reflection of inner reality. If you want to change what's going on in your outside world, in your experience of life, you have to change what's going on in your inner landscape. And that requires, only you can do that, and it requires you to look inward, slow it down, and do the work that I'm talking about here. So I'm going to give you one final story to wrap this up, and it summarizes all of this. So I went through a very painful divorce when I was 41 years old. Those of you that have been through a divorce know that it results in you losing friends. It results in you losing respect of others in some cases. And it resulted in me not being with my kids all the time, of course, because we had 50-50 custody. I mean, there's a lot of negatives to it. It sucked. And I came out of that relationship feeling pretty shitty about myself. I had a lot of regrets, a lot of ways that I wish that I would have shown up and been more present, more connected when I was trying to conquer the world earlier in my life as a business professional. That resulted in the eroding of this relationship. So I've got this belief that I did bad, that I was a bad boy, that I wasn't a great husband, I wasn't a great father. I carry that belief into the world when I'm 41 years old. That belief had me feeling down. The emotions that I were emitting were very low vibrational frequency. And then I met another woman that I started dating about a year later. And she, because I attracted her into my life and it had nothing to do with her, you're going to create a vibrational match with whatever you're putting out there. She picked out all my flaws, as I've referenced earlier. You're not present enough. You're not generous enough. You're not loving enough, all of these things. And I went through this tumultuous relationship for about 3.5 years that was even more painful than my divorce. I mean, it was really, really painful. So when that ended and I'm in my mid-40s, I was like petrified of being in a relationship. So for the next 7 or 8 years, I dated furiously. I was on all the apps, Tinder and Bumble and Match.com and all of that, and swiping left and right and going out on these one and done dates. And I didn't realize what I was doing until finally I slowed it down at one point and asked myself the question, like, why are you not giving any relationships really a chance? I mean, you're going out once or twice with someone and then kind of kicking them to the curb and going back to the apps and trying another. And I realized when I slowed it down, I was afraid. I was afraid of doing a bad job again. I was afraid of going through the pain again. I was afraid of being embarrassed, of telling my friends that I went through another breakup. I was afraid of a lot of things. Then I met my wife, who is now my wife, but I met her very randomly because I had started to do this work and started to work on myself and ask myself the question, like, who are you really? Like, are you, and I really started to feel better about me, and I started to put out a very different vibration. I attracted this amazing woman into my life, but I couldn't pull the trigger on asking her to marry me. So one day about a year and a half into our relationship, I was on one of my retreats, and we do these things called walking trios on retreat, where 3 people will go off on a walk together, and we give them an envelope, and they pull from the envelope STEM sentences that they're expected to answer and share with the other 2 people that they're on a walk with, and they're intended to create self-awareness. Well, we had an odd number, so I went on a walk. I filled in one of the spots, and I went on a walk with 2 of my clients, Ron and Scott. And the STEM sentence I pulled out of the envelope is, if you weren't afraid, what would you move forward with? And, it hit me right between the eyes. And I said to those 2 guys, I would ask Liz to marry me. And Scott asked me the important question. He said, what's holding you back? And I sat with it for a moment. I said, I'm afraid. I'm afraid of going through the pain of another breakup. I'm afraid of repeating old behaviors, of not doing it right, not being present enough, etc. And then he asked me a really important question. He said, let me ask you a question. Over the last 7 or 8 years, have you been doing work on yourself? And I said, like nonstop, man. And he said, do you think that you're any different of a person now that you were 7 or 8 years ago? And I said, yeah, I'd like to think so. I definitely think I've changed and shifted from doing a lot of work on myself. And he said, so what makes you think that you would go through the same experience now that you went through 7 or 8 years ago with all the work you've done on yourself? That's the reframe right there. And it was in that moment that a smile and some tears came to my eyes, and I said, wow, man, yeah, I can do this. And now I'm in I think, a very successful marriage. My wife and I have been together for 6 years, and I feel very lucky and blessed. So that's my final example for you. And I want to encourage you to be brave enough to do this work. I would look into Dispenza. I would look into Eckhart Tolle. And I would look into, creating a routine for yourself to where you step out of your life a little bit, journal a little bit on your thoughts, knowing that those thoughts are driving your emotions, your energy, and putting out into the world what it is that you are attracting into your life, in your personal life and in your business life. I hope that you have found this episode of the 360 Experience helpful to you. That was my intention. Again, in the show notes, if you're interested in learning more about Leadership 360, I would welcome you to interview for a position to be in the program. We do amazing things with our clients. And I want to send you all great blessings going into the holidays and into the new year. And thank you very much for tuning in.